Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be meeting with you today. I'm familiar with all of your names, but it's great to be able to put a face to those names now. As some of you may all be aware, this is my final project, my final assignment in getting my bachelor's degree in the area of marriage and family studies. Now, some of you may be wondering what someone in my field might have to offer to a group of actuaries and analysts. Well, one of the main components to a healthy family or a successful marriage is communication. And it's the same is true with your workplace family. Communication is an integral part of how effectively and efficiently you function together as a team or individually. So there is a Buddhist story, a parable, if you will, that talks about 6 blind men. And one day, these 6 blind men heard of a new animal that had come to town, an elephant. None of these men were familiar with what the animal was or its form, and so they decided to go and, as the best way they knew, feel around and find the truth of what an elephant was for themselves. So when they got there, the first man happened to reach out and feel the animal's ear and thought, the elephant is like a fan. The next reached out and touched the animal's side, thought, this is a wall. The third reached out and touched the elephant's trunk, thought, an elephant is like a thick snake. The next was behind the elephant and touched the elephant's tail and thought, an elephant is like a rope. And finally, one of the men reached and touched the elephant's tusks and thought, an elephant is like a sharp spear. Well, when the men came all back together and began to discuss their experience, they began to argue because each man described the elephant differently. And none of these men could understand why the others didn't see the elephant in the same way they had. Because, see, for each one of these blind men, their experiences tainted how they defined an elephant. And the same is true for us. Our experiences influence how we can see and communicate with the world around us. And I want you to think about that as we continue to talk about communication. As I said earlier, communication is very important in the workplace. Communication creates job satisfaction. It lessens conflict. It helps to increase productivity and the efficient use of resources. And it promotes the formation of good workplace relations. So we all know that communication is so important, but what exactly is communication? So communication is all about being able to transmit information and understanding from one person to another. And so I'm going to walk you through a little bit more on the basics of the process of communication. All communication starts with a sender. This is the person who has an idea or something that they would like to share with someone else. They take this idea and they encode it using gestures, symbols, language into a message. They then send that message to the next person, which is called a receiver. So this person then takes in the message and they have to decode the message and try and understand what, change that into useful information for them. They, in return, then encode their own message as feedback to the sender, and they send it back to there. The sender then, in turn, has to encode or decode the message from the receiver. So this sounds like a pretty simple process. However, as we've all experienced, good communication is not that simple. We generally judge communication to be well depending on how well these messages are decoded. How well did the person who received the message understand the intent that the sender had and understand the idea that the sender was trying to give? So one of the problems that comes when we're trying to have communication are barriers. These barriers come up and distort the messages as they go back and forth between sender and receiver and make it harder for us to decode messages correctly. So what are some of these barriers? Okay, we have both barriers that come up in our private, personal lives. Some of these barriers include an individual's frame of reference, our beliefs or our values. I want you to think back to these blind men. You know, they all understood an elephant to be something different based on this experience. And that's what happens to us. We all come from different cultures, different families, different ways we are raised, and that all influences how we decode these messages and to interpret communication. The status quo, this is an interesting one. You might be saying, what does that mean? Well, we all have some type of relationship with the people we're communicating with. And so we kind of filter these communications through the status quo that we have with the person who's sending us a message. For instance, a manager who has a worker who's always complaining will take a message and receive it differently than the person they would from a person who rarely complains. The next is lack of empathy. Oftentimes, as individuals, we don't seek to understand truly what a person is trying to convey. We automatically go with how it makes us feel rather than thinking, what was the point of what the person was trying to tell me? Now, then we also have environmental barriers, and there's one specific to a workplace. So often time is the biggest barrier. You know, you have a finite time at work and you're often trying to get your own things done. And we often, both on the sender and receiver side, don't give the communication the time that it needs to be successful. A managerial philosophy is another one. How does the communication go between the managers and the people that report to them? Is there a free flow of information or is it stunted? That determines how some of the communication can be interpreted. Next is power of status or relationship. So for instance, in your team, a message coming from Nick as your manager is going to read differently than, say, one of your other coworkers on your same level. The third is terminology. Terminology, especially specific terminology that can be unfamiliar to the receiver, can cause barriers to communication. So what can we do? I want to give both the sender and the receiver 3 specific ways that you can help to overcome these barriers. So as a sender, the first thing you can do is clarify your ideas. Nothing's worse than when you shoot out an email or give a message to somebody before you truly understand what you're trying to say to them. That gives the receiver no way to understand your intent from the very beginning. Next, take time to convey something of help or value to the person that you're trying to communicate with. Now, this isn't directly related to a specific message. This is more setting a pattern where you've shown that you have useful information to that person. And so when you give a message, that person is willing to listen and hear what you have to say. Third, communicate for tomorrow as well as today. Understand that all the communications that you said create a pattern. And so communicate in a way that is consistent with how you want to be seen, not just today, but as well tomorrow. So for the sender, or the receiver, excuse me, the first thing you can do is empathize with the sender. What you want to do is start with thinking, how can I relate to what they're trying to tell me? What is it that they're trying to convey to me? What are they trying to do? And see it from their point of view. Next, hold your temper, go easy on argument and criticism. Oftentimes we get something that rubs us wrong, or maybe a boss tells us something that, makes us want to get automatically defensive. Well, again, this kind of goes along with being empathetic. Stop and first really try and internalize the message first and think about the intent of it before you jump into an argument. Last, ask questions. This is a really important job for the receiver because it gives you the opportunity to clarify or have some responsibility in decoding the message correctly. And with these main points, you guys can successfully navigate your workplace relationships. Thank you.